Big Picture Revealed Show, episode 2 with Michael O'Connor. And we're back here live on Facebook Live and excited to continue with the show. So much going on. I know astrologically we're in this big year, this number 2 year, the year of duality, the year of the dog. I know it's the Chinese New Year this evening. I'm going to be doing a ceremony and bowing at the altar with 17 trays full of fruits. So lots happening. I know that it's a partial eclipse, but let's turn to the expert, to Michael O'Connor, and get his perspective on this upcoming week.
Okay, Tyson. Well, thank you. All right. Just, regarding those factors, yes, as we speak, we're having the eclipse right at this very moment. There's a partial solar eclipse. It's down in the South Seas of the Pacific, so that's its path. Very few people will be seeing it, and those who won't see it total anyway, but it would be epic and interesting to see. Even partials are interesting. Astrologically, the eclipse happens at a certain degree of the zodiac, which is 27 degrees Aquarius, to be exact, in the Western tropical zodiac. There's what's called the sidereal zodiac, but there's also, in Western astrology, we follow the tropical, which is based on the sunlight, the annual cycle of the sun, you could say. Anyway, and it so happens that this solar eclipse is the new moon in Aquarius, which every year is the marking date for the Chinese New Year. I don't think the Chinese planned it that way. I think it's fair to say, probably at least, that when they launched their initiative to say that the new year begins on the new moon, which is very much about, being in alignment with that cycle, because the Chinese calendar is lunar, where Western astrology is actually the only official solar astrology. Okay, all systems otherwise are lunar based. So there's much to say about that. We won't go into it at this point, but the main thing is that the Chinese New Year begins on a different day each year in the sign of Aquarius, which, again, from the standpoint of astrological correspondence, is interesting, because the Chinese don't have the same zodiac correspondences. They don't have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. No, they have dog, boar, rat, ox, and so forth. So, and their system is based on the year. Now, I have studied Chinese astrology a fair bit, and there's a lot of levels. They call them stems and branches. Okay, we're not going to go into this, but when you go into that, you get into more month, day, time, but their surface, zodiac, like their sun sign, where ours is based on the month you're born, theirs is based on the year you're born. They also do the hour you're born, but rather than look for the specific time, at least in popular Chinese astrology, they go with 2-hour segments. It's interesting. The translation of one astrological system to another is like a language, like Chinese to English, so to speak. And they can't be perfectly translated, but they're based on the same principle of an alphabet, which creates words and sentences that creates meaningful language, right? So when you compare systems of astrology, and I've compared many, so that bit of background there. It's an interesting point of departure, and a valid one given what's going on, that we focus on the comparison of systems.
Yeah, do you have anything to say about the year of the dog? I understand that it's rather an auspicious year from the calendar.
Auspicious is a fair term to use in terms of, it's always relative to the relationship one has with. Like, in other words, that when we say one, we can refer to an individual. An individual in astrology can be a country. It can be a state, a province, territory, a city, an institution of any legal kind is a person, by the way. So it's relative to the person, and the surface of it being the dog. That's the first thing. Then secondly, it's what's called the earth dog. In Chinese system, there's 5 elements, and they don't tidally correspond to the 4 elements of the Western or Vedic system, for example. But anyway, there's 5, and earth dog, you know, the dog is a very loyal sign, is generally true. It's corresponds in the solar astrology of the Western astrology to Libra and Aquarius, those 2 signs combined. But if you look at the lunar reflection, it would actually be Aries and Leo. It just so happens. So it's funny to say that, and it gets a little complicated. I'm sorry. It gets a bit dizzying, but you see there's polar opposite signs. So technically, if you wanted to just basically translate the dog, you'd go Libra Aquarius, and you'd get it. You would understand the principles from a Western astrological point of view. But remembering it's a lunar system, you have to reverse it. And so, yeah, it's very much like Chinese. Just talk about Chinese. You have to stand on your head. But anyway, the dog itself, the earth dog, basically speaking, would be kind of protective of various traditions, very sober, practical. People who are earth dogs, born in 58, for example, will be very grounded, sober, realistic, reliable types of people normally. Most people who know them, they will be friendly and open, but a little bit black and white. Will call BS quickly if they think it's that. They won't suffer fools gladly too long. Fools would be those who don't think practically to them. Okay. They might be nice, but they'll think, oh, okay. Okay, granola bar, kind of thing.
All right.
Yeah, they'll think that because they're sort of square in a way, meat and potatoes, so to speak. Often, not always. There's always exceptions to the rule. There truly is in everything. Okay, so yeah, auspicious. You know what I like to dovetail? It's always astrology is always a weave. That's why I study different systems of astrology too. But we can weave in that 2018. Which is the calendar that the globe, the entire commerce of the world agrees with. We'll say it like that, okay? Even though there's Jewish calendar and Chinese and all these old calendars, which are really valid, but they too have an arbitrary start date. I mean, arbitrary, generally speaking. I mean, it's not just 4,500, it's what year is it, right? So we're talking about an agreement. So it's a collective consciousness co-creation, I think, quite frankly. I think it's a collective consciousness co-creation that currently the world agrees it's 2018, all right? Now what happens is, this is not for your linear-minded physicist to appreciate, or others who impose a linear logical argument. If you take a more co-creative Jungian approach and you recognize that we're not just in reality, but we're co-creating it, we go, oh, okay, 2018, and that equals a number. That number is 11. 11 is not just 2. In numerology, you can't take the number 11, just idly reduce it to 2. You can, technically, you should, for a fuller understanding of it, you should. But you also should remain focused on the 11 for quite a while. It's a funny thing to say, for quite a while, meaning, you see, in numerology, there's 2 main master numbers, 11 and 22. The beauty of those 2 numbers is it's linked to the sun. The sun has an 11-year cycle, and every 11 years it's like a heartbeat, actually. Every 11 years, it's like a smaller heartbeat's like our heart goes boom, 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 small, big. I know I'm not a doctor or physiologist or anything to really understand the heart actually, but basically I know that there's a double beat, ba-boom, 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 right? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, the idea is that the sun is like a heart, and it has a rhythmic cycle of 11 years. There might be other cycles. It's true, you know, but one does not dismiss the other. They're inclusive. So 11 and 22 is a rhythm of the sun, and so the numerology that we know is very much woven into ancient mystical knowledge. Whether probably we could say Egyptian, but probably it's older than that. Much older. Egyptian, I subscribe to the belief strongly that Egypt is the remnant culture of a much older culture. And that's not to dismiss the glory of Egypt, by the way. But if anybody who studies Egyptology, like, for example, will recognize that the oldest kingdom was more advanced than the next, and that was more advanced than the next. It kind of went downhill. I mean, so to speak. Again, everything's relative, and I don't mean to impose value judgments, but generally speaking, it's true. Anyways, ancient Egypt, the remnants of Egypt goes back to, what would be the remnant culture of Atlantis. So I'm just hinting that the notions of numerology and astrology are much older than we think. And anyway, getting back to the 1122, even the 22, as important as it is as a master number, is derived from 11. So here's a couple more final quick facts on 11. Up in the 19th century, or the 20th century, 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, all these centuries, there was about one or two a century that you would have an 11 year. But in the new millennium, it'll happen every 9 years for centuries, as long as we remain. Yeah, it's really worth mentioning. You're like, holy shit, that's a lot of 11s, right? Yeah, that is a lot of 11s. And here it goes. So it'll be lasting a long time. And 11 can be described as the number of metaphysics, by the way. You can describe 11 as highly creative. Negatively, it's like two sides of the same, like two edges on the sword, cuts both ways. Okay, you want to keep that in mind. 11 can be understood as the right and left brain woven. Like when they operate right and left weave, high creativity occurs. So the highest reaches of 11 is the marriage of the right and left, the yin and the yang, the male and the female, the marriage of the poles. Any which way you want to weave those two. 11, which interestingly now, and it goes on, a 1, the number 1 in a mirror is 11. It's a riddle, and that's where the Chinese know that riddle well. So it goes perfectly with your Taoist ceremony tonight in the Chinese New Year, because the Chinese hold some of the most wonderful riddles in very small phrases. One of the most classics is, from the 1 comes the 2, and from the 2 comes the 10,000 things. And what they mean by that is that the 1 is unity, the 1 is wholeness, the 1 is the whole universe is conscious, the 1 is God, the 1 is whatever you want to call it, of oneness. When you divide the 1, it becomes the 2. You have yin and yang. As far as they're concerned, you're in duality now. Once you have the male and the female, once you have the procreative energy of the 1, it's like the splitting of an atom, or it's like the cell mitosis. You can talk about cell mitosis. As soon as the 1 becomes the 2 and it procreates, it proliferates. So that's what they meant. And they meant the duality is a principle of that emerges from oneness. They'll even go further to say that the 2 that the 1 comes from is actually an illusion. This is where it gets really interesting. It's an illusion, relatively speaking, meaning like ultimately the 2 are really 1. Okay. It's a mouthful to think this way, but that's how, as a matter of fact, that's very much a foundational principle of studying, whether you're studying metaphysics, whether you're studying astrology, whether you're studying numerology, whatever you study, if you want to get into the more esoteric sciences, you can begin with a Taoist principle of the one becomes the two, and the two becomes the 10,000 things. And if you study that deeply, you're going to basically exercise a very fundamental principle of understanding, and you're going to also develop a creative mindset able to handle what can otherwise be understood as contradictions or paradoxes. You're going to, in fact, celebrate paradox.
So behind the illusion of the paradox is the Tao.
Yes.
Is the unity.
Yes. And then the flow of the Tao becomes a mystical understanding. And, Taoism actually factually is a child of Hinduism. Lao Tzu, as I understand it correctly, there may be others, but basically the scholarly librarian studied Hinduism, and was very fond of it. So he thought the Chinese need a philosophy, but the Chinese philosophy needed to be more practical for their purposes, and maybe something distinctly Chinese. And then others came along with the development of I Ching and Chinese astrology, but the Taoist principle was born, and it created a mysticism and various mystical, magical, shamanic even. Goes in all directions. But if you study Chinese, whether you Chinese medicine, I Ching, astrology, Feng Shui, whatever you study Chinese, it has a fundamental core of the same language. So it's very practical. And they boiled it down more.
That's the exciting thing about Chinese. They didn't have a scientific revolution, because that underlying principle goes back 3,000 years, and even to this day is the guiding principle, sort of beyond or underneath what's going on the surface. So it's like an unbroken lineage of understanding our relationship to the whole that has brought this culture through thousands and thousands of years. Very interesting.
Absolutely, very interesting. And along the way came Confucius. Some people cynically refer to Confucius as Confusion. I think that would be harsh and inaccurate, but he was a sociologist, basically speaking, and he did his best to contribute to a social order in China. And at worst, it's created a kind of a social order that's rigid, negatively speaking. It's not. So Confucianism might appreciate Taoism, but it's not really Taoist. And it became more tradition-based, more linear. It was based on a more linear model, even though Confucius is often...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, even though Confucius is often depicted as wise, and I'm not suggesting he wasn't, by any means I'm not, but he wasn't wise in the same way Lao Tzu was, or a number of others that, I've studied it, but it's been a while since some of those names are difficult to remember, but we'll say Lao Tzu and keep it simple.
Well, it's basically like right brain and left brain. For the Taoist, it is, the after work. We come home from work, we get out of our work clothes, we put on our Taoist robes, and we drink wine, write poetry, and we are creative. And then we get up in the morning, we then put on the emperor's robe because we need to go to work for the emperor, and now we're following the Confucius rules of culture, morality, and all the rest. So it's sort of like one has the civilizing effects of humanity, and the other has the more liberating, philosophical, go with the flow. So they're sort of like two sides of the same coin.
Yes, exactly. As that wonderful quote that says there's two kinds of education. One is how to make a living, and the other one is how to live.
Yeah, good point.
The Chinese, those two systems maybe similarly like the Taoist model of yin and yang interpenetrating one another, work that way, as in other words, they I think both endeavored to have both sides. Like Confucianism
Right.
wanted, yeah. It's so the Chinese Confucianism was born quite a bit later after the birth of Taoism. I don't know exactly the date line, but it was a fair time later. And that doesn't make it less valid by any means, by the way.
No.
Although Confucianism of itself isn't erudite in the Taoist way, it doesn't have that model, right?
No, it
You
has to do
appreciate
with
that.
morality, has to do with your
Right.
relationship to society, relationship to your family, relationship to, to how to live in society. And the
Mhm.
intention of Confucianism is to have a structured society that can birth, heaven on earth, or the right way of livelihood, or the
Mhm.
right way of being in the human world. Whereas Taoism says, forget all that. We're already one, and we know that. And so let's be one. Let's be in that divine flow. Let's be in the wu-wei way. Let's get out of the brain and get into the heart and go with the flow. So it's very
It,
different ways of getting at it.
yes, it's true. That's a very good point. Confucianism is very outer world, like the
Yes.
neighbors, the rules, society, and that's certainly valid. It's more the ego's attitude and logic. Taoism is more yield to the flow and be in tune with nature.
Yeah.
Of itself, Taoism may well not have very effectively established great civilization. But if you bring the Taoist principle into that civilization, as they have done with, for example, everything from the Tai Chi to the medicine, then it will probably, and has produced, positive contributions. So, I mean, everything has to evolve, and Taoism too, and all of their various systems, even the systems like Feng Shui and so forth, they can be a bit rigid. Like, it's ironic and interesting that even Taoism has a dogmatic side of,
Mm-hmm.
strict adherence. So dogmatism and rigidity can emerge quickly anywhere, right? But you're right. I agree with you. It's a flow versus a kind of a feel into it flow, kind of almost hippie, versus logical, structural, uh, you know, yeah.
Analytical.
Yeah, it's like you can even take one more example. It's like the samurai versus the ninja. The ninja,
Yeah.
yeah, the ninja were the rebels, of course, always trying to undermine the encroaching corruption, and the samurai upheld the establishment. And it brings it back to the
And it all brings us back to this number 11 that you're
yeah,
talking about in the
yes,
duality.
it does.
And, do we want to go with the rational mind and overwhelm our intuition, have bound up by Confucianism or the status quo or the matrix or whatever we want to call it? Or do we want to go over to the other side and be in the divine flow? Just let it all happen. It's all woo-wee, there's no beginning and end. It's just the flow, which is dwelling in our heart, connected to our guidance and to source. Or do we learn how to balance the two, like you said, that marriage of the divine feminine, divine masculine, that sacred marriage? And guess what? That's what this year is all about. What an incredible year.
It is. You can say that. It's a part of what this year's about. The Earth Dog itself, and remember, like the Chinese system is a year-long totem, and it's sort of linked to Jupiter because Jupiter has a 12-year cycle, and they were very fond of Jupiter, by the way, in the Chinese system. And they don't really adhere to the constellations like we do. They adhere to the Big Dipper. That's they have a constellation, okay, and stuff like that. Anyway, the main point is that the Earth dog, like there's 5 elements, so there's a 60-year cycle in the Chinese system. All the 12 years or the 12 signs over 5 elements is a 60-year cycle. So anybody who's born in the year of the Earth Dog, 1958, basically will be turning 60 this year, or has just recently. But in any case, and just the thing there is that the Earth Dog would be more Confucius, by and large. By and large. Now, if it was the Water Dog or Metal, perhaps, they would probably be more Taoist. So you got to keep in mind that the element of the sign is significant. And so in other words, each Chinese sign has a base element. So you look at the base element and then you ask yourself, how does the current year's element correspond to that base element? And that's the beginning of the predictions that they'll make. For a general, for all of us, they'll say, I'm kind of tempted to go and grab my. We don't have much time, but I'm tempted to grab my.
Well, go for it.
Yeah,
why not?
Yeah, okay. I'll grab my Chinese astrology book and just see what it's saying. I'm looking to see where it is, though. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, just quickly, what element is the year? Like, so you look at the element for all the signs, once again, the base element. I don't know if I can do this fast enough. Let's see, is it, it's not there. Oh yeah, I found it. Good for me. The dog is metal. Okay, now that's interesting because when you're in an Earth year, the way, Earth in the Chinese system is like what they would call the center of the bagua. Okay, I'm mixing metaphors. It's not really metaphors. You see, and the bagua is like their compass. It's really big in the feng shui. And the feng shui, right. Chinese feng shui is the outcropping of what would be pendulums and dowsing. Dowsing.
Yeah, geomancy. Geomancy would be the closest.
That's
would be the closest.
Geomancy, right? Geomancy is the root, and they were really concerned and interested with north, south, east, west, etc. So they adhere to that. The Earth is sort of in the middle. It's like the compass of the planet, and there's north, south, east, west, and the Earth, literally the planet or the ground, the Earth, it was in the center, and that's rather important to understand. So when it's Earth, that's probably what they mean by auspicious. It does come around, and what you have is what's called a double year. Like, in other words, can't remember what last year. I think last year was the fire. Yes, it was the fire rooster, and the year before was the fire monkey. Okay, it goes fire. So this year's Earth. So if it's Earth dog, next year will be Earth boar. Okay. Now, the idea is that, interestingly enough, though, the dog, its base element is metal. And okay, so the metal and the earth go well together because, generally speaking, the metal comes from the earth. Okay, so they'll say that. But the next year, the base element for the boar, it just so happens, is water. Now, when you take earth and water and combine them, that's not so good anymore. Because what the idea is that water, anything can be seen in its positive light, but generally speaking, the earth water principle is not great. The water in the earth creates mud, okay, which is practical. But the idea is that it creates it's kind of like a disturbing energy. It's not as harmonious. So I think that's why I didn't actually, from that logic, the Earth dog is an auspicious year. Yes. I think I see why some are saying, because, the Chinese almost generally, every year is kind of auspicious, right? Or that word auspicious is one of those delicious Chinese words that we want, right? They want to speak, they speak in terms of like a luck and fortune. It's and so their language kind of becomes fortune telling, ironically. And so in their mindset, things like astrology are fortune telling. Just by the way, now Western astrology has worked hard and continues to say, look, we're not fortune tellers. It's just to say now, Vedic astrology is a very predictive astrology, so it's more of a fate-based, prediction-based sort of fortune telling. Okay, I don't mean, and there's different types and levels of astrologers all over the world. Okay, some will be more mystical, but Western astrology has emerged to be more psychospiritual. By the way, it depends. Again, some astrologers are just glorified fortune tellers. Now, that doesn't mean there's no skill in that. There's a lot of skill in it. But the better astrologers, in my view, the cutting edge of Western astrology is to incorporate a who are you principle. Who are you deeply? Who are you? And then let's take that who you are theme and incorporate a what's probably going to happen. Like, let's bring in a predictive element. Okay. That's rather important. And which is kind of what dovetails in there is a free will factor. So where in, let's say, Vedic astrology, they want to minimize the possibility. They want to make a prediction that's going to take that margin of possibility and eliminate it. Very much like science in a sense. It's just interesting and good. But a lot of people, what they want is they want to know that there's if given bad news, for example, they want to know that there's what's the margin of possibility.
Now, with Vedic astrology, is it true that I'm getting an echo? But is it true with Vedic astrology that some readings that there's actually that you can go to certain Vedic astrologers and in the records that they have is that your actual birth name, and they can actually figure. I mean, this is what I've heard, and that some people have had some amazing insights from that. I mean, even the belief that that's possible is that it's a very predictive, universe. It's a very structured, ordered, like you said, it's the fate is already sealed from the time you're born. It's the only way that we could figure out exactly who you are in the Vedic tradition. It's sort of quite direct.
It's a very good point. Very good question. It's the ongoing issue. It's almost like the biggest bone of contention of all, what you just said in astrology, especially in Western astrology. And especially the irony is that, astrology has kind of been pushed to the side by the mindset or the paradigm of science. But it says, we'll do all the predicting. Thank you very much. We don't, okay, now sit down, little boy, kind of thing. We're the big, but they can't predict the weather very well, let alone anything else. They're just as at the mercy of various things. Can they predict an earthquake? Can they predict the market? Can they predict the weather? Not really, not 100%. So they shouldn't be, people who adhere to the scientific paradigm staunchly should be a bit humble. Just because you say you're scientific doesn't mean you're objective. That's the grandest illusion. The grandest illusion.
Right.
Now, it's fair to say that various types of modern technology can produce various types of results, which would be great, whether it's computing and so forth. So nobody's going to say that there isn't some powers there, of course, in scientific technological developments. No question, right? No question. But The astrology model comes in and works with, now I just want to back up a bit. The bone of contention, just to be clear, is what's called predetermination. That's the word that gets everybody excited. Predetermination. Predetermined. So what we want to understand is that fate and destiny are not the same word. They're not synonyms. Destiny is like a direction of probability of destiny. Okay, it's like a you're destined in that way. Okay, fate is more locked in. You're kind of fated. You're okay. So are you okay? And then the important keyword or phrase or understanding is that free will is a part of destiny. So your destiny is to incorporate wisdom to exercise your free will and thereby, in effect, challenge fate. Challenge. And that's a beautiful thing. That is exactly what Western astrology is all about, by the way, in its philosophical core. When you get deep down inside, now, again, different astrologers, practicing Western astrology, it's just like anything. We're all speaking the same language of the same alphabet. Doesn't mean we're producing the same literature.
Right.
Okay, it's really
that's a great point. It's interesting because that whole thing about fate and predictability, and having the ability to make choices to change one's fate or one's destiny is really basic within the Chinese system too, which is the whole lineage of the I Ching, which is how do I align myself individually, phenomena of nature, emperor, because I'm responsible for everything, the rain, the weather, the success of my kingdom, and the well-being of every citizen. So I better know how I align with all of this.
Yeah, free will is like surfing, skiing. Like we use creative ingenuity to produce tools that we can ride, or like the wave, or we can surf this, the snow, if you like. We can overcome a limited, faded, narrow interpretation of what's possible. So that's the illusion, is that the astrologers are narrow-minded fools who don't appreciate free will. But that's a complete misunderstanding of both all better systems of astrology. Honor that immensely. Now, what gets a bit tricky is that there's a fine line between being very able to be predictive with your skill in astrology. That's good. You're able, but you're also wise enough to know when not to. It's a very interesting thing. You have to really, depends on the situation. Sometimes with people, they want black and white answers, will my marriage not make it, and this and that. And
Right.
I'm thinking to myself, you're imposing a lot of responsibility on my shoulders for the small amount I'm charging you to make a verdict on your marriage. So what I'll say is, well, this and this and this, and probably that, and this is the timing when that, and perhaps you can look at this and you can discuss that and the other, right? So I'm trying to bring forward probabilities and possibilities, then also invite a process, say, hey, let's talk again in about a few weeks, because and that's happened recently, by the way, where a husband and wife were in that place. And I'm thinking, you know what, if I tell him he's leaving, she's going to come at me potentially. How dare you, So, oh yeah, you have to play now. So what I basically said was, okay, I see these things. It's understandable, and I try and encourage self-awareness on each part and discussion, right? But they, next thing you know, a couple of weeks later, oh, we've decided to separate. I said, oh, that's good, because I kind of knew that, and I see where it's going now, so I can now enter the next line of conversation. But people will be very irresponsible and what you could call expectant, maybe. They want you to give them black and white outcome answers, so they don't want you now to celebrate the free will factor. They don't want you to work with probabilities and possibilities. Now they want the fate. You understand? So you have two basic. Yeah, you have different types of clients. Clients who go, give me the fate. But if you tell them the fate, you run into the problem that they're like, how dare you tell me what I'm gonna die or something, right? Yeah, you're right. I'm not gonna tell you that. I'm not gonna say that. But they half expect it. So it's not very human to have double standards. Let's put it that way. So that's
and I think that's true with any guidance or intuition or work that you're doing. Is just because you know the full blown, message about what's going on in the person's life, you have to be very, very cautious about how much you reveal and when you reveal. It all has to do with timing, like you said. It's sort of like unwinding the ball of thread, right? At the right time and the right place to help them make the decisions that are helpful for them. Yes. Very good description of this whole aspect of we want to know that we know, but in actual fact, we don't.
And you got the words right there in that it's there's outcome and process. And the ego is all outcome, by the way. That's ego.
Yeah.
And soul, shall we say, is process. And the two, like yin and yang, want to work together. It's like you're playing hockey. You want the puck in the net. But if it's not about playing the game, you kind of miss the point. And that's where people become too attached. We get into all those principles. Same thing as with clients who would have double standards. So astrologers, unfortunately, often get treated like fortune tellers. In other words, they'll go to a counselor again and again and again, but they only go as they want, and they don't expect anything big. They expect to go 3, 4, 5, 10 times. But the astrologer, which they kind of don't believe in, but they want all the answers now. That's a very interesting little game. And because astrology has sort of in society, it's kind of in a sort of something of an underdog position, then it's okay to piss on it a bit. It's okay. We're going to piss on this, hey, this is bullshit anyway, after all. So it's interesting how I watch people. They're the fewer, by the way, in my experience, but they're there. And how they'll take advantage of that situation, consciously or subconsciously. They're rather manipulative types of people, quite frankly. But anyway, getting back to it, just the basic point is that predetermination is the bone that really gets the people in the scientific community very excited. And oh my God, how dare you say that, right? But the astrologers go, well, actually, we're not saying that. What we're saying is that the fate is the probability, the destiny is more, it's probability woven with possibility. More that you have to, like, destiny is more flexible, shall we say. The fate is more narrow, but the free will is a part of destiny. And when you get that, you got it. And if you don't get it, you don't. Almost sounds a little dogmatic, but it's the same thing like with science. For example, maybe it's a slightly different argument, but just to say, what comes to mind is this. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I really like this conversation because it takes us all the way back to the yin and the yang. To be fully conscious and aware on the planet, particularly this, Master 11 year and the number 2, which is duality, the yin and yang. As you talked about, surfing the Zambui, that middle line between, or the middle path between the yin and the yang is where we're going to have that balance. And it's neither light nor dark. It's somewhere in between. And finding that path in every moment is really what we're doing. And what this show is all about is helping people find that sort of middle way where they're not overwhelmed and they can make conscious choices. So that's a great introduction. So tell us, Michael, where you're going to go with this show. I know that a couple of things, just to set the context, is I know we're getting ready to do weekly horoscopes for the different signs. Is that correct? Is that part of what you want to go with?
Yeah, we're going to be doing those in like a live version. So while I have been writing horoscopes for many years, and the written is good for all kinds of reasons, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to offer a visual so people know the logic of the interpretation. So people will be able to get their horoscope, but they'll also see the logic of why, and that'll give them a lot indirectly in terms of understand. Well, basically, students of astrology can benefit immensely, but also those who aren't interested, well, they'll learn invariably if they do watch. But second, they will sort of be introduced to the holistic philosophy, because interestingly enough, each week, for example, a weekly horoscope, it's the same order of planets and signs and the aspects they make, but for each sign, the dial turns 30 degrees.
Mhm.
That 30-degree turn is rather significant. It's like having a camera and you're looking at an object in the middle of the room, and you're going to take 12 photographs, but each is from a different angle. And the object you're looking at is not a simple object. It's a rather complex object. It's like, call it angulated, if you like. Like if you call it, for lack of better words, like a statue. Imagine you're looking at a statue of a figure, right? And you were to take 12 snapshots of it from 12 different angles. Well, it's going to be rather interesting how each one's going to be different, isn't it? It will be,
Absolutely.
same statue, but 12 different angles. And the logic of astrology starts to produce very interesting parallel message, but with a definite twist for each sign. And that's how it works. It's really interesting. So yes, that's going to be basically the big picture revealed. By the way, the name of this show is to really stretch people's minds to see basically and it is from the standpoint of astrology, admittedly. Now, from this standpoint, though, not teaching astrology so much, but it's that astrology works. That it works is absolutely TNT on the existing materialistic paradigm. And the existing materialistic paradigm kind of takes the position of all other paradigms are an imposition, but the materialistic paradigm is the imposition. It has come along and established, almost like the Federal Reserve, clunk, now we're the law. It's like, well, you're like the new kid on the block. The materialistic paradigm has asserted kind of stubbornly asserted a position and defends it like rapidly, right? So the big picture revealed is to reveal that the perennial philosophy, the ancient knowing, the mysticism, the Taoism, all of these principles of everything from holism really comes forward and says, that materialistic model is very limited, very, very linear, very dogmatic. So when we say myopic, yes, that we say that astrology works, it's a conviction that it works. And I listen to people go, oh, it doesn't work. I'm like, have you studied it? No, I'm a scientist. I wouldn't study that. Oh, okay, that's called hypocrisy. And by the way, when you went to school and you studied science, do you think that you came out of there objective or conditioned? Answer: conditioned to think and to compute and to interpret a certain kind of way. And if you don't see that, that's the beginning of the fundamentalist position they'll take. Okay, so that astrology works at all is the beginning of the crack in the door, if you like. How and why it works, how and why it works is wonderfully rich in terms of not just how the universe works in a holistic understanding of things and scientific, philosophical, metaphysical, gets into a weave of disciplines, but it starts to reveal who we are. It starts saying,
I like that crack analogy. It's like the crack in the cosmic egg. Exactly. I like that,
Exactly. It's a crack, and all you need is a crack, and it starts. And it's not, I'm not under any illusion that here I am to spark this. This revolution is fully happening right as we speak. everywhere. The internet has unleashed it, because the internet has unleashed the giant, and the giant is the small person, the individual in the marketplace, the common man who has their own thoughts, but they're not holding positions of power. They're not what they call empire. They don't, they're just average, normal, intelligent, good thinking people who are the common masses, the 99%. And they left to think, and they do, and they study, and they question, because they don't have power to lose. So they have nothing to, there's nothing to defend. So they're like, well, just a thinking, averagely intelligent person, and an average intelligent thinking person is a very intelligent person, and they think, and what they're thinking, I mean there's levels and so forth, but basically what I'm getting at is that the internet has awakened the free thinking and sharing mind, and here we are, right, doing that. And any endeavors to shut down the internet would be a sign of a fear-based control despotism, and unfortunately that still may occur. It's, we can't, I'm not hoping, I'm not predicting, I don't even want to give thought to that, but that's the way it's been in history. Like megalomaniacs like control, and anything that might...
The giants have been unleashed in the world, eh?
Pardon me? Yes.
The giants have been unleashed in the world.
The giants, on the internet, there's a lot of things about the giants, and it's like pretty cool stuff to consider at all. But the giants are really giant ideas that have been around, that have been around forever. You and I know that. We celebrate that, don't we? And it's a beautiful...
Yeah, we do, yeah.
So that's where I want to go with this. That's the big picture revealed, is to talk at that level of that, how and why it works, and to stretch beyond just, we're not here to study astrology in the, the root or the rote, way, as valid as that might be. And there will be jabs at that, but the horoscope that people can subscribe to there will give you that visual breakdown. So that'll be fun for people that they won't... It's probably rare. No, some people are doing that out there. It's happening. It's happening already. So I'll just bring it forward too. And then I'll also do a small piece called, basically it's the tip of the week, which is a more generic read. So the generic tip of the week will be the read for all of us. And there'll be a little segment, and that will be, okay. So there's 3 parts to this. And so, yeah, very excited and happy to be here. So that's basically... Yeah,
it sounds great. And all this is hosted on the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy, and the landing page will be up very soon, and to give you access to all these 3 levels to play with Michael. And don't forget, you can have an individual reading with Michael. He's available to do that, and we encourage you to do that. Get a sense of what's about to unfold for you, that whole dynamic tension between fate and destiny, what's in the stars or in the planets for you. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a great show. Thank you. And we'll be back next week, same time, same place, and carry on with the conversation.
Excellent.
So until then, Michael, let's call it a wrap.
Okay, perfect, Tyson. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for being here, and look forward to next time. Blessings.
All right. Bye for now, everybody. The Big Picture Show Revealed is sponsored by the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy, hosted by Facebook Live on the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy Facebook page, produced by The Wellness Show, www.thewellnessshow.ca, and stay tuned, same place, same time. See you next week. Bye for now.